Top Med Talk.
Hello, welcome back to Top Med Talk. I'm Andy Cumpstey, and I'm here again with my co-host Kate Leslie at the 2025 Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine meeting in the beautiful Dingle on the wild west coast of Ireland. It's great to be back, isn't it, Kate?
Oh, it's fantastic. It doesn't matter what the weather is like or what's going on in the outside world or anything. When you get to the Dingle Peninsula and you see the lapping waves on the harbour, or in this case, the white breakers on the harbour, and the green pasture, and it just fills your soul with a warmth, I think.
I think warmth is the right word. It can be as cold as you like out there, but it's a really warm, welcoming meeting. I love coming back here. And again, we've had a fantastic 3 days again this meeting. It's definitely the only place that I look over people's heads when I'm lecturing and see the waves blowing things past the windows and so on. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So as you know, Kate, we started this Periop Profile series in EBPOM London in June. And the focus of this series is to speak to a leading mind in our space, whether that's research or policy or commerce, and really find out about what makes them tick, how they got to where they are, and really kind of go into the bits that perhaps they haven't talked about before. And I'm really, really excited, particularly sitting here in Dingle, that today we're going to chat to Professor Monty Mythen about that.
Andy, Kate, it's great to be here back on Top Med Talk.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're the Emeritus Professor of Anaesthesia and Intensive Care at University College London. You're one of the founding, if not the founding director of Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. And of course, with that, it's broadcasting on Top Med Talk. And now the Senior Vice President at Becton Dickinson Advanced Patient Monitoring, formerly known as Edwards Life Sciences, which of course is a big major sponsor of Top Med Talk, so thank you. And on top of that, there's so many things to talk about with Everest and the Perioperative Quality Initiative and the Journal of Perioperative Medicine and the work in the college and National Institute of Academic Anaesthesia, and you've got a beautiful family and all that. So there's so much to go at. I'm really excited where we start with this. But I guess the first place to start is we're sitting here in Dingle.
Yes.
And it's a very personal place to you, isn't it? So why don't we start there?
Born of two immigrants to the UK, Irish parents, one from the southeast, my father, and one from the southwest, my mother, from just down the road here on the Dingle Peninsula. So she actually came from the village of Lispole, Lispole, which is the last village you go through as you come into the village of Dingle, coming from the airports, etc. So that's the first bit of the journey. And I was then, I would wake up in almost all of my holidays as a child, I would wake up in Ireland, if you're sure. So you were sent home by the parents to live with your relatives, your cousins, etc. So at one stage I was a little bit confused as exactly where I lived. Did I live in suburban London or did I live in rural Ireland, if that makes sense?
You were at school in London, not in Ireland?
Yeah, I was born and brought up in southeast London.
Right. So which school did you go to?
I actually went to a school on the south side of the river and a little bit further out. I went to a primary school in a little place called Welling. And I was lucky enough to get a place at a grammar school, which I passed by 11 plus, and went to a grammar school called Chislehurst and Sidcup Grammar School. It was a first big lucky break.
And then jumped from there into medical school. How did that all come around?
So I was in, people used to ask me, what do you want to do for a living? Mother was a district nurse. That's part of my journey. My father was a welder, and that's some other interesting professional responsibilities as well. I was lucky enough to be in this grammar school, and I was naturally pretty good at the sciences. So I had the tendency to do maths, physics, biology, etc., etc. We got as far as getting into the sixth form. People would ask me, what do you want to do? And I say, I wanted to be an engineer, because I said to my dad, what should I say if people ask me? He said, well, if you say you want to be an engineer, they'll go quiet fairly quickly. And then I was sitting there, didn't really know what I was going to do. And one day the teacher came in and said that there's a trip to medical schools. Who wants to go to a medical school trip? And I was sitting in the back of the biology class misbehaving. And I put my hand up and said, is that a day out, sir? And he said, yeah, it's a full day out. I said, well, I definitely want to go then, which is my tendency. And that was the beginning of my journey. I was lucky enough to be one of the few people from school that got into medical school and went straight in at 18, at the age of qualified at 23, and haven't looked back since.
And I guess it's tempting, thinking about the journey that comes after this, that you think you dive straight into anaesthesia perioperative care. But we've known each other a long time, and I know from speaking to other people that I think actually commerce and commercialism has been in your blood probably longer than the anaesthesia bit, and you were commercial even at medical school, is that right?
A little bit. I set up one of the first laser printing CV companies. Other entrepreneurial things like used to do a little bit of comedy cabaret, not very well, raised money for charity doing that. Always enjoyed entrepreneurial activities, but worked out fairly quickly that I wasn't going to be very good at them. So I might be good working for someone doing it, but I wasn't going to be very good leading that journey and becoming, you're on a journey to become a doctor. Why wouldn't you follow through and become a doctor? So I actually didn't go straight into anaesthesia. I initially did, emergency medicine, worked in New Zealand for a while, which was wonderful in emergency medicine. Did a little bit of intensive care as a non-anaesthetist, did a reasonable amount of cardiology. And actually for one of my interviews, when my interview to get onto an anaesthesia training scheme, they said, why have you done so much cardiology? And I said, well, I always wanted to have something to fall back on if I couldn't make it as an anaesthetist. And I think that's the thing that got me the job, I think.
So where did you train as an anaesthetist?
Middlesex Hospital and UCH scheme in London was the key bit. So they just put together one of the first structured training schemes that took you all the way through the early phases of training, as it used to be called, through SHO registrar to senior registrar. So it's a rotational scheme based out of University College Hospital and the now closed Middlesex Hospital merged into the combined UCH, and then rotating around different specialist or general hospitals in that sector of London.
And the intensive care medicine training was inbuilt as part of that as well?
Intensive care medicine wasn't its own specialty when I started. I really enjoyed doing it. The only real way to do it in the UK at that stage easily was being a combined anaesthetist intensivist. So you picked up quite a lot of experience, and then you choose to do what effectively were fellowship type of jobs by putting your hand up to spend more years on intensive care. But it was ill-structured from that perspective. There was no exam at the end of it. It was all rolled in to the general anaesthesia training.
And what about the research side as well? Because you were starting to dabble with things, I think, early on with research at this point as well, were you? Or is that later?
Just later, really, again, sort of, lucky breaks. Andy Webb, who was one of my mentors, arrived from St George's Hospital as a very young consultant appointed, and started to get me interested in his research that he was doing. And then we started to go and help him do some laboratory work at St George's. And I thought, well, actually, I was on course to do my MRCP, having fairly quickly got my FRCA. I don't like exams, so I like to get them out of the way as quickly as possible. And I realized that there's opportunity to do these PhD things. And I thought, well, this sounds like great fun. I said, you get a grant and you therefore get more time out of the traditional work to follow a research interest. And there was one particular area of research that I was completely intrigued by, which was the role of poor blood supply to the gut in making people sick after major surgery. So off I went. So I applied for a grant and was lucky enough to get it straight away.
So I know this story do you know the story about the work with the gut circulation, Kate? Have you heard this story from Monty before?
I've heard some of it, but I'd love to hear a summary.
So the theory that the gut is the motor of multiple organ failure was there at the time, suggesting the fact that when, as part of people becoming ill, they get a poor blood supply to their gut, and then effectively the contents of the GI tract leak into your bloodstream, which, is a recognized phenomenon and does make one very sick, you can imagine. That also, around the same time as that theory being quite prevalent, discussed a lot and demonstrated in scientific models, a device came out called the gastric tonometer that allowed you to measure the blood supply to the gut, or a proxy measure of it. So I was one of the first people to get hold of the technology and start to measure it, and ended up doing multiple papers of measuring perfusion to the GI tract, either in healthy individuals that we were insulting in some way, like bleeding them, or in critically ill patients or in patients undergoing major surgery. And we could demonstrate that there was a high incidence of poor blood supply to the gut, which was then associated with the badness that we thought it caused, like bugs in the blood or high levels of inflammatory factors, and then demonstrate that was associated with poor outcomes. And then the final chapter, small mechanistic study, was to fix that and demonstrate that you could look after the patients differently and they wouldn't have a poor blood supply to their gut and seem to do better. That's it.
That's fascinating. But there are so many fascinating things we could talk to you about. Like, you finished your PhD and your training and you became a consultant at UCLH. And then at some point you took over.
It doesn't quite work that way in our system, but I know what you're getting at.
And you scaled the heights of various other organizations, most of which you created yourself. But I wanted to talk to you about your work on oxygen and in particular your trips to Mount Everest. How did that start?
So I was lucky enough to have some, wonderful fellows, a number of them who being here at this meeting, we've all grown up now. Professor Mike Grocott, for example, was one of my first fellows when I got back from the USA to join the Middlesex Hospital as well as UCLH. And they were already doing high altitude research. So because of my experience with gastric tonometry, they wanted to do a particular set of experiments about gut perfusion. So I taught them how to use the kit, and I got some kit for them. And I started to become more and more intrigued. And then I went to a lecture by John West talking about the attempt to estimate the levels of oxygen on the summit of Mount Everest. And a sort of light bulb moment where you say, well, that is amazing that so little oxygen is required to keep the body alive. And yet in the intensive care unit, we're doing so much iatrogenic harm to achieve a magic number of oxygen that we probably don't need. Then that coincided with the fact that Mike Grocott and colleagues wanted to repeat that John West experiment, which was done with exhaled breath, but to do it by directly sampling the blood on the summit of Mount Everest. And I thought about this for a while, and I said, that's just not going to work. We can't get a massive grant. It's going to be very, very expensive for effectively, irrespective of your background, effectively who are now rich kids, to climb Mount Everest and make a reasonable attempt at killing yourselves by trying to take a blood sample. So we were away on a retreat for some reason at a meeting in France, and I woke up one morning and got back to the group and said, I think the problem here is that I've read your so-called research in the space, and it's typically sort of N of 6 or N of 9 of young, fit people who know they can climb high altitude. So it's a pretty useless evidence base. I said, and I also think that most people have a sort of itch to go to Everest Base Camp. So why don't we do a properly powered study across the ages, including multiple disease states, where we take as many people to Everest Base Camp as is required to answer an appropriately powered, fundamentally important question. Even if that's 200 people, which is what it turned out to be.
That's exactly that.
200 people was required. And that's what we did over a number, coming up on nearly 20 years now, of the first two experiments. And the guys they checked their box, which was to get to the summit and to take the blood gases, published in the New England Journal of Medicine.
Absolutely fantastic. Were you always a fan of high altitude exploration?
No.
Really?
No, I love mountains, but I like looking up at them. I'm not very good at heights. And I was very keen on hiking, on trekking, walking in the mountains. The mountains are beautiful, etc., etc. But I had absolutely no ambition at all to do the really dangerous bit further up. Scared the hell out of me.
I was wondering more whether you loved, I just devoured all the Chris Bonington and Reinhold Messner books when I was a teenager. I just loved it.
I was aware of them and got into some of them by default because of what we were doing. I was absolutely fascinated by the physiology, by the adaptive physiology. So that was where I spent my reading time. And the simple little nuances like, when we grow in the womb, we're growing at an oxygen level that's similar to the summit of Mount Everest. A mitochondria only needs a kilopascal of oxygen to work. Stem cells don't grow unless they're hypoxic.
And then you created a podcast so that you could talk to interesting people about mitochondria. How did that happen?
Well, with long-term ambition, so the evidence-based perioperative medicine meetings are very proud of the group that gets together, the conversation that we're having, the quality of the speakers. But we were in an echo chamber. We always had a sort of collective ambition to see if we could broadcast more effectively in some way. Then we were supposed to be heading off to a meeting in Washington, D.C., and I had a health problem that meant I couldn't go. At the same time, it happened that I was partnering with someone in London who had a radio studio. So Martin Howe and colleagues, thanks for that, Martin. So we suddenly rapidly said, why don't we do a radio show between Washington, D.C. and London, selfishly, so that I can still be at the meeting and converse about it. And then within a month or so, we had the name Top Med Talk, topmedtalk.com. And it wasn't long until we had our first 1 million downloads, our first, 1,000 podcasts in the can. And the wonderful Nick Majerison sitting next to me was part of that journey from the very beginning.
And how did you discover the wonderful Desiree Chapel?
So we were doing a Perioperative Quality Initiative, another organization I've been involved with helping to found, meeting at Duke, in the Washington Duke in North Carolina. Desiree was invited along as one of the contributors. We were on a collective walk around the path that goes around the golf course. And Desiree said, can I ask you to write an article for my blog? And I said, no. Actually, she said, well, that's a bit rude. I just want you to write a short article for my blog. It says, people will do that because you're lovely and you're charming, but in reality, no one wants to write another version of what they've done before. I said, we've started this podcast. If you ring them up and say, will you talk to me about your work? They'll almost all say yes. And again, the rest is history. Desiree joined us, amazing, brilliant at what she does. They've gone through the whole thing of being the managing editor, the lead American anchor, and now brought all you wonderful people on board. I know you're here for Desiree primarily.
Totally.
You've hinted at Duke, and we've not actually talked about how you got there.
So I'd done reasonably well with my higher degree and got lucky with gastric tonometry and the gut being new, let's call it sexy stuff. Another one of my mentors, Win Aveling, I got to a stage where it was looking like I could possibly in the future be a sort of professor of anaesthesia or run a research department. There was nothing to aspire to at University College London. There was no adult professor of anything anaesthetic. Despite the first anaesthetic in Europe, it had never enabled academic progression in the university. So I said to Win, what should I do next? And he said, you've got to go to America. He said, you've got to go to somewhere that's got money and opportunities and you can rapidly progress. So the Royal Brompton at the time filled another form in, sent it off to the advice of people who've been there before to Duke University Medical Centre. And the next minute I was in Brussels at a meeting and I met the lovely Rob Sladen, who was the director of critical care there. And we had a beer and had a chat in a bar. And the next minute I found myself on a plane to join their faculty there in both cardiothoracic anaesthesia and adult critical care. Amazing 2 years. I managed in one way, shape or form to generate 83 publications in the 2 years.
Wow. I'd say, we've talked about Duke and your time there a lot over the years, and I know it was very influential in your thinking that I had no idea it was only 2 years.
Yeah, collaborating all the way through. Wonderful leaders there. At the time, amazingly well-resourced with an absolute can-do attitude. They make you work very, very hard, but usually the answer is, if they think the question's worth asking, certainly at the time, they would give you the resources to answer the question. Then if you did it efficiently and got it published in JAMA, they gave you a bit more.
And what did your wonderful family think about you saying, right, we're off to America?
Well, we had myself and Kate. Kate was pursuing her career in London at the time. We had one child at the time, a toddler, Patrick, and she said, yeah, let's go do it. So off we went. I'm lucky enough to have another child where we're in America, Charlotte. She's at number 2 or 4. Alice and Tom, so just in case they ever got around to listening to this. And we just had a wonderful time there. Kate stepped back from her career for a period of time to look after the kids and look after me, 3 children to look after. You see America? It all worked out really well.
And then the move back from there was to set up the adult professorship, if you like, at UCL.
Yeah, well, that was my ambition. So they then decided you needed to have these sort of exit certificates. So we just reached the point of needing a CCST, Certificate of Completion of Specialist Training. And I didn't have mine because although I'd done an excessive number of years because of doing my higher degree and doing an extra 8 years in obstetrics or whatever it was, I didn't have the ticket. So an academic job was advertised in the UK. And I meant to say where it was, but I applied for it and magically I got my CCST. It was outside of London and it was run by an influential person at the college who could start to put the pieces together. So I then saw a job advertised at the Middlesex Hospital and I thought, well, that's actually where I really want to go. So I applied for that and got a regular consultant job.
An adult academic chair and an endowed chair of anaesthesia.
So I came back with a pretty sizable grant, which is always handy. Late stage development of a novel drug, getting close to regulatory approval. So I had quite a lot of money to be able to utilize for research purposes. But that didn't seem to cut any ice with the Department of Surgery because I wasn't planning to just give it to them. So they wouldn't give me any space or any academic recognition. So I hired a set of offices on Tottenham Court Road and put up a sign for the Centre for Anaesthesia. And one day, the dean walked past, or the vice provost for health, knocked at the door and came wandering in and said, what's this place? And I said, well, it's ours. He said, but I thought we told you couldn't have any space. I said, yeah, I listened to you. So I rented this. And he sat down for a while and listened to what we're doing. So he said, okay, this isn't good enough. Let's go and find you some space. And he did a very magnificent piece of space, which was the first floor of the Middlesex Hospital in what used to be one of the major surgical teaching spaces. He gave it all to us, which was lovely. That was the beginning of the Centre for Anaesthesia. And then the next lucky break was there was actually an endowment at UCL, which was for the Portex professor of pediatric anaesthesia, the wonderful David Hatch. They'd failed to fill that position and were at risk of losing the endowment. So somebody came and knocked on my door and eventually said, I know you don't do peds, but can you help us to try and hang on to the endowment? And that proceeded from there.
And you were there for how long in total?
Oh, that's a great question. I started 25 years, 26 years. Well, if you count from the very beginning, it's 40. But
And then you made a really brave move into the healthcare industry. Had you been thinking about that for a while, or did it come to you all of a sudden?
So I've worked very closely with industry from the point of doing industry-related studies for regulatory approvals, the tonometer being a new device that ultimately failed, and my now chair was an industry endowment. So knew what they did and was increasingly tempted by it. Eventually, just serendipitously, again, happened to be taking a mini sabbatical in California with the wonderful Edwards Life Sciences, and they offered me a temporary position. I thought, well, the timing's right to do that now, and I took that, and it turned out to be great fun, and I then took the permanent position.
You used the word tempting. Explain to our listeners what you mean.
I think Sol, who's Sol Aronson, another one of my mentors who spent a bit of time in industry as well, I think put it very well. He said, you have all the money in the world to do just one thing. He said, now the downside is you have all the money in the world to do just one thing. Now, of course, they don't have all the money in the world, but they have substantial research funds which already pre-exist to do research. And Edwards Life Sciences, now EBPOM, don't do just one thing. They do have very broad portfolio of research that happens to be right in the area that I enjoy. So then I could accelerate my research activity, knowing that the funds were not guaranteed, but much more likely to be forthcoming than continuing to apply for grants. Now, it's also, people imagine that the people in industry get paid vast amounts of money. I think it's in the public domain that my boss's boss does, if you see what I mean. But that's not the case for the people who make we're not poor, if you see what I mean. It's not all about the money for that reason. It's about, academic fulfillment, etc.
Have there been any surprises since you took up the new role?
I think my biggest surprise is how long it takes and how expensive it is to get devices approved. Because when my colleagues decide to do the next sort of new piece of kit that looks like it's going to work really well, there's a prototype, 3D printed prototype on the table within a week. But you're still looking at, it's not the 20 years for pharma, but you're still looking at 5 to 10 of the whole process of refinement, safety, testing. So it's, for some bits of it, we need to sort of rethink why we think they're so expensive. Actually, some of them are a bit remarkably cheap if you look at the whole process, comparing it to a drug. That did surprise me. I didn't think the runway was that long.
And what about the reception of your decision to move into industry by your colleagues and friends?
The vast majority, it's been very good. There is a subset that suddenly won't look you in the eye or talk to you. They'll walk away at a drinks reception.
Really?
Yeah, and you know who you are.
Because, listeners, Monty is the life of the party, so it's astonishing that anyone wouldn't want to talk to him.
They get a little bit uncomfortable. They think, oh my God, I'm standing next to some industry person now. But they don't hesitate to write you to ask you for grant funding.
I mean, I'm just watching the time. It's like, there's letters about to start. So there's so many other things we could cover. There's so many things you've achieved and done on the way. But from the Roki, the Perioperative Quality Initiative, which we talked about in Top Med Talk, involvement in the college, NIA. What's been your highlights over, to be honest, it's been an absolutely fascinating career, even just hearing about it now, but there's so many things we haven't covered. What else do you want to highlight to people?
4 healthy, happy children who still talk to me and seem to like each other. Yeah.
I think that's a really nice note to finish on. So thank you very much, Monty. I can see you get a bit emotional, but thank you very much for joining us on When We Talk to Your Profile. It's been a real pleasure, Tate and Nick here listening as well, but real pleasure talking through all this with you, because I know we've all known you for a long time, but you've been a real inspiration to many of us along the way. So,
an enormous privilege. Thanks, Monty.
So as always, thank you very much for listening at home. You can find us on our website, that's topmedtalk.com. You can also find us on our app, on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on X, we're now on Blue Sky. we're on YouTube, and we're on LinkedIn. If you do go to any of those places, please do hit like, please do hit thumbs up. It really means a massive difference and helps keep us free and open access around the world. And of course, we should also thank our fantastic sponsors, which this year is Benedict Dixon BD, GE, and without whom we couldn't keep bringing Top Med Talk free and open access to all of you. And finally, thank you for listening. See you next time.
Top Med Talk.
Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe, check us out on YouTube, and of course on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Also, it's important to remember that Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that, and the way to do that is ebpom.org. Check out our website and find out about some of the incredible conferences we're going to be arranging across the year. ebpom.org.